Okay, for this first introductory lesson, we're going to start by opening up the application. So when you first open up AutoCAD for the first time, it should look something like this, depending on what version you're in. For this example, we're using AutoCAD 2023, but basically they all generally look the same. In this case, we have the open to open a drawing if you've already been working on one, new drawing, and typically there is metric and imperial template already set up, but if there is not, you can just open a drawing. In this case, I'm just going to open up a generic imperial template. Okay, so this is the basic user interface for AutoCAD. Again, version to version, there's not really many significant changes. They basically all look the same. And for the template, whether you start it up in a metric or imperial template, the basic difference of a template is just the units. So I'm typing in units to show that it is set already by default, because it's an imperial template, to architectural instead of decimal, and the precision set to show as 0 feet 0 inches. So it's already set up for an imperial, and again, it's in the base measurement for the imperial system. That's always how it should be. You don't want to set this to feet, because you can always draw in feet or display your units in feet later, but when you're starting up a drawing, you always want it to be in the base measurement for imperial or metric. So metric would be millimeters, and obviously imperial is in inches. So now that we've checked that, it's good to go. So going back to the user interface here. So you see you have a standard ribbon layout along the top with the home, insert, annotate, parametric, and so on. And then in each tab on the ribbon menu, you have buttons for different common commands that you can either type in or you can click and find on the ribbon menu. Once you've used the program enough, you can kind of just type in the command. For instance, let's say I want to draw a rectangle. So I'll start typing in rectangle, and you'll see right there, it's not the first one, but it's the second one down. So you can select down to select it, or you can keep typing it, and you'll see it kind of predicts exactly what you want to do. And you can just hit enter, and then you can see right beside, there's a tooltip right beside your mouse saying specify first corner, or you can put in units. So you could put in like coordinates, but in our case, we're not really going to use coordinates too much. We're just going to pick a point. And another thing to keep in mind is the command line down at the bottom prompts you on what your options are while you enter a command. So we're just first going to pick a point, and then you can see down at the bottom, we can now draw this rectangle by area, by dimension, or by rotation. So most commonly, you're going to draw it by dimension. So you put in D for dimension and enter. And then now when you look at the command line or the tooltip, it's asking you to tell it how long the rectangle should be. So we're going to say 10 inches, enter. Now it's going to ask you how long you want the width to be. So let's make it a square and make it 10 inches. And again, we're using the symbol for inches, which is the quotation, enter. So now we've got a square that is 10 by 10. So another couple quick things to go over when you first open up AutoCAD is you'll want to set your angle restriction, your polar tracking, to probably 5 increments of 5. So what this does is while you're drawing, as you go pick your first point and then go to pick another point, you'll see that it snaps every increment of 5. So this is handy to have on. Another one to have on is your Osnap. So this box down here with another small box in the upper left corner, you can click on the little arrow beside that here, and this will pull up the pull-up menu and then click Object Snap Settings. So by default, some of these will be set, some of them will not be set. So you want to select all and then hit OK. So now, just to show what these do, I'm just going to draw a couple polylines. So now I'm going to draw another polyline. So when I pick this first point, let's say I want to pick the middle of this first line. So having Object Snap on, it's set to have an Osnap for the midpoint. So you can see when I hover over the approximate midpoint, I get that triangle symbol. That means midpoint, and you'll even see an indicator pops up and spells it out for me. This is your midpoint. So I can start my line from that midpoint. So that's just a quick example of what Osnap does. There's a lot of settings shown. They're all very handy, but it just helps you while you're drafting. So another thing to keep in mind or introduce is the layers, which we'll go over more later. But if you type in layer, you get this menu, which I've right-clicked on and anchored to the right of my user interface. So I always want this there. If I scroll away from it, it'll disappear, but if I hover over it again, it pops up. So what the layer manager does is it gives you an outline of each layer that is currently in the drawing. So I've preset some layers in this template for myself. Every time I start an Imperial template, because I've saved these to this template, they will always be there anytime I start a new drawing. So again, there's some basic lines there for like center line, construction lines, and so on. And some options. You can create a new layer. You can set a current layer, but most importantly, you can customize each layer to be on, off, locked. You can set the color, which generally is irrelevant. It's only a visual thing while you're working in AutoCAD because most of your drawings will be printed to black and white. More importantly, the line type. So you can set if it's continuous, dashed for a hidden line, which is down here, or a center line, which is dash dot. And then also, very important, the line weight. So default line weight is around 0.2 millimeters. So we have a heavier line set up down here for object lines at 0.3, and also you can also set whether the layer will print or not. So if it's a layer on your drawing that you don't want to necessarily print, you can click this on or off so that no matter how you draw it, that layer will never print. So typically I use the non-print layer for viewports, which we'll get into later. It has to do with printing your drawings, but you don't want to necessarily show that viewport around the drawing. That'll make a little bit more sense later. We won't really get into it now. Okay, so another important one that you'll probably want to have is properties. So typing in properties and it's predicting what I want, hitting enter. And again, I've right-clicked on it and I've anchored it to the left. Again, the layout for this, to mention, it's also significantly different for Mac users. The buttons and tools are kind of a lot more hidden. So that's one where you kind of really need to learn to type in commands, get used to typing in commands. Just everything is a little bit more harder to find. This is the PC version, and it's a little bit better laid out in my opinion, but Mac works as well. You just have to go searching a little bit more or have to learn to type in the commands a little bit more. So going back to properties, if you look here, depending on what object, so I'm going to draw a polyline here, and you can select it, and your properties will basically give you all the information on that item you've selected, or if there's multiple, they'll show up as multiple. It'll say polyline and then however many you picked, and again it'll show you all the properties of those objects. If you've selected multiple objects, say polylines, hatch patterns, dimensions, it'll show here each component and how many of them you've picked. If you wanted to isolate, say, line or dimension, you would click on that and then it would show you the properties for those objects. But again, important to have this just to make drafting a little bit easier as you get more knowledgeable with AutoCAD. It's very handy to have available. Okay, so another thing to cover off. So AutoCAD, UCS, user coordinate system, that's basically what this object down here is. That's your UCS. So user coordinate system, it basically means every point in this first tab, the model space, which is your drawing space in AutoCAD, is related by coordinates. So every line, every object, every circle, every dimension has that info tied to it. Everything has a start point and an end point, a midpoint, and it's all relative to coordinates. So you could, so I'm going to start a polyline command, PL, enter, and then I'm going to put at 0, comma, 0, enter. So what that does is that starts a line at coordinate 0 dash 0, 0x, 0y, and then now I'm going to say, okay, well, we've got that point picked, so let's pick the next one at, we'll say 10 inches, comma, and then say 15 inches, enter. So that set the second point along the x 10 inches, and then up 15 inches. So this is more relevant for say land surveyors, so people doing site plans where they have to basically geolocate on a map the X, Y, and Z coordinate for objects on a drawing. And site plans are a very important piece of documentation. You need them for a building because you have to basically map out the plot of land that you're going to be building on or designing for, if it's a construction project, obviously. But site plans are very important because it says where all those physical landmarks are, if there's an existing building, and it's also relative to where you're going to place your new structure. You have to propose it on a site plan. So coordinates are very, very relevant for that type of work. But again, that's a niche, kind of a niche occupation for it. Generally, you don't need to use coordinates for input. You could do what's called direct distance entry. So direct distance entry is just, again, polyline. So I prefer polylines over line just because they're a little bit neater. The more line segments, it kind of stays together as one object, whereas standard line, each line becomes its own object. So that can get messy later on. I would recommend always using a polyline, so just PL instead of L. But for direct distance entry, just pick any random point, and like the name suggests, you just kind of use your mouse to direct which way you want to draw, which direction you want to draw in. And this way we'll just go completely horizontal, and we'll say 3 feet. Enter. So that's direct distance entry. And again, from there you can show your mouse up, down, wherever you want. We're going to bring it up, and let's say 1.5 feet. Enter. So that's direct distance entry. It's much simpler. It's less input. Instead of drawing coordinate to coordinate to coordinate, it's much, much easier to do that. So again, down here, this is a very important tool. You don't want to lose this. It's a basic running script of all the commands you've put in historically. It's where, again, a lot of information pops up when you are in a command. So I'm going to put C for circle, pick a point, and then again, you can see you have some options there. By default, the circle is it's asking for an input for radius, but if you wanted to put diameter, you could put D, enter, and then again, keeping your eye on the bottom here, specify the diameter now. So it kind of keeps you informed on what to do next, what your options are in this command. So it's good to keep an eye always down on the command line while you're drawing, especially if it's like a multi-set command like rectangle or circle or arc, or even just polyline. There's a lot of different options while you're in these commands, and if you keep your eye on it down here, then you can use it to draw by these different dimensions. So we'll just finish this by saying 2.5 feet. So there's my 2.5 feet diameter circle. Okay, so now we're just going to draw some of the shapes from the shape example handout. So the first one starts with a circle, so we're going to type C for the circle command and hit enter. I'm just going to pick any point on the drawing, and the handout shows that we have a radius of 6 inches. So I'm just going to go off in any direction here and say 6 inches, enter. Okay, the next shape, a rectangle. So I'm going to put REC, rectangle is the first thing that pops up, enter. And again, handy for Osnap to kind of like line things up while you're drawing. So I'm just going to hover over the tangent of that circle and start my rectangle right here. And you'll see Osnap, because of the way we've turned everything on in Osnap, we can pick that and it's going to be perfectly in line with the top of that circle. So again, handy for keeping things nice and neat. And then we are going to go back to our rectangle, look at the bottom in the command line and see D for dimensions. So we want to input by dimension. So D, enter. And then we know the length from the drawing is 18 inches by 12 inches. Okay. And then now again, the last two shapes are odd shapes. I'm going to start with a polyline command. So PL is the short key command, enter, and I'll line it up with this side of that circle. And then the first dimension, 12 inches, 8 inches, 6 inches, another 6 inches. And you'll notice I stopped putting in the quotations just because, again, the base unit is inches. So by default, if you don't put in a symbol for feet or inches, AutoCAD will default and just say, okay, this person is inputting in inches because they didn't specify what the unit was. So 12 across the bottom. And then now we know this line is at 45. So again, Osnap, having all the Osnap settings on, you'll see how handy it is here, because there's my 45, but where do we stop? So we're going to pick over the end point, which was actually our start point. So once we kind of hover over that and then bring our mouse down, there we've got 45 degrees, and we're also in line with our start point. So it's going to lock on there. So just click it, and then you can either hit C down in the bottom if you're paying attention to the polyline command, down here C to automatically close it. So no matter where you have the mouse, if you just hit C and then hit enter, it'll close it as one single object. Alternatively, you could just pick the endpoint as well. Okay, so for the last shape, I'm going to start the polyline command again. And then using Osnap, I'm just going to hover over the corner of these two objects. Start it here. So let's go this way, 6, enter, 6, enter, 6, enter, and 6 back. And now we've got 14 minus 12, so 2 inches, 16 inches, because 20 minus 4 on the diagram, and now up 6, and now out 4. Okay, so A for arc, and then we want R for radius, and 3, and we know that the diameter is 6, we're going up 6, and then L, enter, and C for close. Okay, and now we've drawn those shapes. Okay, so now with these shapes, the last thing we're going to do is delete them. So to delete, you could simply select a shape and press delete. But before we do that, just want to explain the different ways to select objects in a drawing. So if I do one click on the left mouse, you can see I get this, what's called a fence. If I go to the left, it's green. If I go to the right, it's blue. So there is a difference, which can come in handy. And also, I don't personally use it a lot, but if you press and hold the left mouse, you get what's called the lasso. So this is all different ways to select objects within your drawing if you're in a tight space. But to me, just the rectangular one click and then lift your finger to drag the box, it does the trick. So the difference between the two, green is everything green comes in contact with, every object green comes in contact with, even if it's not the entire object, it will select it. So now let's go back, and this time with a blue fence. So we'll make it roughly the same size we did the green one. We'll cross those same objects in roughly the same spot, and even while we're at it, we can cover half of these ones. So we'll do our second click here, and you'll see nothing was selected. So the reason for that is the blue fence, when you go to the right, it has to cover the entire object in order to select it. So let's say we want to delete these first two, pretending all these objects are a little bit closer together. So we'll do the second click here. It will only pick these first two because we didn't completely envelope these ones. But again, with the green, same thing. We're only clicking over half. It'll select the entire object. So let's just delete that. And again, instead of like this, we'll envelope the entire object of the fence and hit delete.